Why does humankind even bother? You wreck everything you've ever made, then you start over. Like it'll be any different the next time.
I suppose we're no good at facing our memories. We'd rather gild the past, find something worthwhile among the rubble, and build a future with that.
I guess you really do have a short memory.
No, not me. You see, it is my choice to forget.
So, Final Fantasy VII. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance this title needs no introduction. But here's one anyway. Originally released for the PlayStation in 1997, the seventh entry of the by then already long-running series of RPGs took the gaming world by storm. The first 3D outing of the series, it used the then new CD-ROM technology in order to cram what was, for the time, an epic adventure of massive proportions which helped further cement Squaresoft's storytelling and cinematic ambitions within the scope of JRPGs. While for modern standards the game obviously looks goofy and archaic, there was really nothing quite like it at the time. It represented a giant leap into what RPGs and story-driven games could do, enticing people's minds on the possibilities for the future. And while things quickly evolved both in technical and artistic terms quite quickly from then on, it was Final Fantasy VII that laid the groundwork for both the series' brand and its genre to further evolve and change, being largely the reason why many people got introduced to the series, the genre, and even games as a whole. It came out exactly at the right time, at the right hardware, and possessing the right ambitions to cement itself as a quintessential work of gaming, and a must-play no matter your personal tastes. A piece of history that will forever be fondly remembered, and as such a gold standard to aim for as it burst out of its bubble and became a bona fide mainstream JRPG that single-handedly brought prestige to a genre that lasted for many years before that weird and quite honestly xenophobic period where everyone said Japanese games are outdated and bad.
What do you think about the recently Japanese game?
They suck. I'm sorry, like, you guys need to get with the times and make better interfaces and like update your technology. We're totally kicking your ass. Back then, you guys were the king of the world, but your time has passed.
And all of that is why the Final Fantasy VII in your memories, the one you fondly remember playing for hours on end, being blown away by its plot twists and turns and grandiose cutscenes and soundtrack, simply does not exist. Now a quick, or at least as quick as I can possibly muster, recap of the original story, as it will become extremely relevant for the rest of the video, because I'll obviously get into the remakes. It goes without saying, but full spoilers for everything Final Fantasy VII related. Final Fantasy VII tells the story of Cloud, a mercenary who's hired to help Avalanche, an eco-terrorist organization, to blow up some Mako reactors from Shinra, a mega company that runs the world as if it were a country government. You see, in the universe of Final Fantasy VII, the planet is alive and somewhat sentient, and it lives through what's called a life stream, a substance that runs through the entire celestial body and is basically the accumulation of souls from all life within the planet. You are born from the life stream and return to it upon your death, making it the cycle of life. Shinra, however, developed a method of harnessing the life stream into energy, called Mako, which disrupts the entire cycle and essentially sucks the planet dry of life itself in favor of powering technology, particularly through the use of materia, which is crystallized Mako energy, building the highly advanced but dystopian city of Midgar as its base of operations. The company is so massive and all-encompassing, it has started entire wars and political upheavals all over the globe in order to build more reactors, hence why a group of people concerned about the planet's well-being decided to take matters into their own hands. Cloud here is a former soldier, in all caps, a title conferred to the elite warriors Shinra has at their disposal, and he's a cold, sarcastic, and generally jaded individual who happens to reunite with his childhood friend Tifa while on this gig. Because they stir the pot too much, they fall into a trap on their second mission and Cloud ends up meeting Aerith, a young woman who is wanted by Shinra on account of being a descendant of the Cetra, an ancient civilization. As these characters are hunted by Shinra and react to further happenings in the story, they eventually infiltrate their HQ, where they realize Sephiroth, the famous hero of Shinra and best soldier around, is apparently still alive as he murders Shinra's president. Given Cloud has a past with Sephiroth, he and his growing party of friends decide to follow Sephiroth's footsteps in order to uncover what he's up to. The beef Cloud has with Sephiroth has to do with the fact he burned his and Tifa's entire hometown to the ground in a fit of madness. Okay, to put that into perspective, we need to go back in the timeline a little. Turns out a long time ago, a parasitic extraterrestrial being later named Genova fell into the planet, and using its telepathic powers, almost entirely destroyed the civilization of the Cetra, ancient nomadic humans who could commune with the planet and manipulate the lifestream. Centuries later, Shinra discovered the remains of Genova and began studying it, developing projects focused on engineering superhumans using its cells. The ultimate result of this endeavor was Sephiroth, though this fact was hidden from him until a mission in Cloud's hometown, where he found out about his origins, went cuckoo bananas, burned the entire village of Nibelheim down, and tried to run away with Genova's remains. Cloud fought him, though he strangely doesn't seem to remember how that turned out exactly, and Sephiroth was announced as skilled in action. Back in the present, the party travels through the world in search of Sephiroth, meeting a bunch of black-clad catatonic people mumbling something about a reunion along the way, and eventually realize he's looking for the Black Materia, a dangerous artifact hidden away by the ancients due to its capacity of summoning meteor, which, well, it's self-explanatory, it's a giant meteor. Sephiroth manages to get it by somehow controlling Cloud into giving it to him, and as a last resort, Aerith goes to the city of the ancients in order to pray to the planet so she can activate the white materia she has with her, capable of summoning Holy, the ultimate spell that can protect the planet from any threat. In what's probably one of the most iconic scenes in gaming ever, she's killed by Sephiroth in front of Cloud and turns into a Genova monstrosity who fights the party. In chasing Sephiroth, the party eventually arrives at the northern crater, the place where Genova first fell into the planet, and Cloud begins to feel Sephiroth's control over him all the more strongly as he meets the black-clad figures all converging into a single place. Turns out Sephiroth's true physical body has been dormant here all along, and the reunion these guys kept talking about was the converging of everyone who had Genova cells injected into their body on the northern crater, in order to give him the black materia so he could be reborn and summon Meteor. It's then that Cloud finally learns of his true past. While he did leave with ambitions of becoming a big-shot hero, he never became a soldier, only managing to become a random Shinra mook. He was present at the Nibelheim incident, but the actual soldier alongside Sephiroth was a man named Zack Fair, who also happened to be Aerith's boyfriend. All the things he remembers being a part of actually happened to Zack, who lost to Sephiroth in a final confrontation. Cloud, however, managed to grab Zack's giant, steely, hard sword. Wait, that came out wrong. And stabbed Sephiroth from behind. Wait, that also came out wrong when he was distracted, resulting in Sephiroth falling into the lifestream as Cloud passed out from his injuries. He and Zack were taken by Shinra to be experimented upon and infused with Genova cells, but Zack managed to escape with Cloud in tow, only to be gunned down by Shinra troops. In his dying breath, he entrusted his large and girthy sword to Cloud, who stumbled back into Midgar and, due to the trauma in the experiments, had his memories jumbled up to the point where he imprinted Zack's memories as his own. Meanwhile, Sephiroth traveled through the lifestream and developed the ability to directly influence people who have Genova cells, thus devising his plan to eventually get a hold of the black materia, becoming a god and destroy the planet. Now fully recovered, the party decides they need to travel back to the crater in order to stop Sephiroth, who is using his now immense power to block Holy, which is revealed to actually have been successfully summoned by Aerith before her death. They battle a now immensely powerful Sephiroth and edge out a win, freeing Holy to do its thing. But it might be too late, as Meteor is now too close to the planet. Aerith, now part of the lifestream, helps to make it work, but it may still not be enough. We cut to 500 years in the future, and all we see is Red 8 and his children atop a cliff, looking onto a destroyed ruin of Midgar, the ultimate fate of humanity left ambiguous. That's until the sequel movie, that is. You see, with the series' resounding success, Square Enix eventually greenlit what it would call the Compilation of Final Fantasy VII, starting with the announcement of Advent Children, a sequel CGI movie focused on Cloud alongside the prequel mobile game Before Crisis, which never saw the light of day outside of Japan and has long since been discontinued. Other titles in this compilation are Crisis Core, an action RPG for the PSP focusing on Zack's story that features very questionable lore additions, and Dirge of Cerberus, a third-person shooter sequel for the PS2 focused on the character of Vincent Valentine. The reactions for these titles have been pretty mixed, and a big point of criticism for Square Enix's attempt at expanding and further milking the legacy of Final Fantasy VII, and I'd argue 2005's Advent Children is the most important of these when it comes to informing the direction the series would take, both as a creative endeavor and as a reaction to criticism that eventually resulted in the current remake project. Plus, it has been confirmed by Rebirth's creative director that it ties to it, though how exactly has not been specified yet. So for this movie specifically, what's going on is 2 years after the events of the original Final Fantasy VII, it's revealed humanity has indeed survived wholly, though Midgar itself has been blown up to ruins, with Midgar Edge, a new city built on the outskirts of the original metropolis housing all of the displaced population. Cloud and Tifa now have a motorcycle delivery service, and Rufus, who somehow survived his very obvious death in the original,
The day of the explosion,
What do you want from me?
I managed to get out
Who
of
were the
building
guys that attacked me?
before it collapsed.
I'm leaving.
I'm sorry, I just love how this scene is there specifically to tell viewers to fuck off with their questions, has gathered the Turks to attempt to rebuild Shinra and atone for its sins by finding out Genova's head is still around and keeping it to himself, because that's a great idea. What could possibly go wrong? Problem is, 3 new Sephiroth lookalikes calling themselves Remnants of Sephiroth are looking for it, as they are part of Sephiroth's new plan to resurrect from the lifestream and try to destroy the planet again. Plus, the lifestream is now infected with Genova cells, which causes a mysterious deadly illness called geostigma that mostly affects children. Now, people in general really dislike this movie. They say it's nonsensical, just a bunch of fan service, way too gritty and not really satisfying, and I get where the criticism is coming from. But I'm biased. I actually have very fond memories of this movie from when I was 13, repeatedly watching a bootlegged version of it burned to a DVD at my living room, and I really liked it back then. For this video, I rewatched the movie in its 2009 re-release titled Advent Children Complete, which features 30 minutes of new scenes plus a bunch of touched-up visual revisions. And, well, it's not as good as I remember, but it's nowhere near a bad movie. I'm sorry, I just had a great time rewatching this. And while I think all the criticisms are definitely valid, I just don't get why its legacy is one of such livid hate amongst the fandom all those years later. It does what a good sequel is supposed to do. It continues the story and the ramifications from the original game as it further examines its characters, in this case mostly Cloud, as was the plan all along, and offers a lot of fan service and Easter eggs to its audience, and even incorporates a lot of it as part of the story itself or as non-intrusive nods alongside well-choreographed fight scenes. Plus, for the time, the visuals look really great. It's not without its faults, especially when it comes to how its own backstory is only half told in the movie proper, and a director's cut alongside a full novel of short stories were needed in order to properly make sense of the finer details. But yeah, I don't know, I'm sorry, I just don't see any reason for this level of negativity. It's fine, it's a good movie, and I will die on that hill. Anyway, for the purposes of this video, and what I particularly like about this movie, is how it explores the aftermath of the original game for Cloud's psyche. The entire movie is anchored on a theme that I personally think is one of the core pillars of the original PS1 game, dealing with loss and guilt over inadequacy. The entire movie is based on the fact that Cloud has not been completely able to move on from the events of the original game. He still blames himself for Aerith's death, still feels afraid of how Sephiroth was able to play him like a fiddle for such a long time, and believes he failed to live up to Zack's legacy, the true hero he so pathetically attempted to copy. He sees himself as incapable of truly saving anyone and is deeply afraid to even try because, if things go south, he'll blame himself for that too. He pushes his own friends away and ignores their calls because talking about it would mean having to face it. And Sephiroth coming back in the form of his 3 remnants is essentially his worst nightmare. So he tries to keep his facade of the beginning of the game as a means of coping, of running away. Much criticism has been thrown at this movie for turning Cloud into an edgy emo and generally going into an overly realistic and gritty depiction that's not really in the spirit of the original game. While I can agree with the latter, though it's not like it's completely devoid of humor.
You don't have a phone?
Where can I buy a phone?
Who's he?
I really can't see it when it comes to the former. That's the fruit of what I believe to be a very superficial read of the Advent Children's portrayal of Cloud. You know, muted and dark colors, stoic demeanor and all that. I honestly think the entire thing is very true to the character and makes complete sense upon just a bit of further scrutiny. First off, yes, the original game, while having a lot of weighty, dramatic moments, was goofy, very goofy, and that more fun and laid-back atmosphere has been shelved for most of the compilation's works. That much is true, but Cloud himself was never not a stoic tryhard. That's what he was. That's communicated in his designs. He is stated in-universe to be like this by other characters. A great deal of humor comes from this attitude being challenged by all the goofiness and moments of bonding. That is all there. Second, from playing the original, I never really got the notion he completely overcame his demons once he found out about his past. There was really no time for deeper introspection. He had to get his shit together in order to stop the literal end of the world, of which he did succeed, but at an enormous cost. And now he has to deal with the actual emotional fallout. This isn't a radical new interpretation of the character, but a sympathetic and well thought out extension of it after the events of the original. Plus it even ties back to the game's overarching narrative themes. The whole movie is about Cloud eventually realizing his fears can be conquered because he's no longer alone, and he has the potential to actually care for those important to him. It's about forgiving himself for not being perfect, properly processing and coming to terms with his loss, emboldening himself of his own capacity and looking forward to the future instead of the past. Something of which many Final Fantasy VII fans, and even Square Enix itself, simply can't do, isn't it?
Stay where you belong. In my memories.
I will never be a memory.
Final Fantasy VII was a global gaming phenomenon, a trailblazer, a trendsetter, an instant classic. As such, it came to mean a lot for a lot of people, myself included. While I will make no excuses for the very questionable artistic decisions Squeenix has made with the compilation, I still can't get over the very existence of this fucking character, for example. I also think a lot of the later works related to the original game were just fighting a losing battle. They had to both add and live up to an enormous legacy, and all kinds of expectations that come from dealing with such a massive responsibility. While they certainly had their fair share of problems, I don't think they were judged as fairly and, more importantly, as charitably as they could have been. While one could be a cynic about it and say the sole reason of these products existing is to further milk what was a single game into its own franchise using nostalgia as bait, and there is obviously some truth to that from a business standpoint, I personally just don't subscribe to that. Whatever financial incentives there were that willed these products into existence, it doesn't change the fact that the creatives involved were probably people who cared about its quality, who wanted it to live up to the original's legacy, and honestly tried to create something good. Dismissing it with capitalist cynicism is not giving the many people involved the credit they deserve. Whatever feelings you may have for Advent Children as a whole, there is a clear attempt to tell an honest, sensible story about overcoming your guilt and dealing with loss in there. Crisis Core may have retconned a bunch of crap into the lore, including one of the most annoying and pointless characters in existence, but it also features a touching story about fractured friendships, self-discovery, the importance of optimism, sacrifice, and I mean, come on. That retcon ending portraying Zack's last stand as this big battle against a whole army before leaving his legacy to Cloud is just so fucking cool. Heck, even Dirge of Cerberus, which in my opinion is a particularly low point on the series, has interesting bits going on when it comes to expanding Vincent and Lucretia's tragic relationship. But none of those hits really matter, only the misses. Many regard the compilation as an absolute disaster, something that retroactively ruins the original game and convolutes or fucks up the lore. Cynical cash grabs that, for whatever they may do right, ultimately only taint the perfect legacy of the original PS1 game. But is that legacy really as perfect as we remember it though? What I'm about to say next may make a lot of people mad. Final Fantasy VII is a great game, but it's nowhere near perfect, as no real art tends to be. Its materia system, while very fun and flexible, is easily breakable and lends itself to long stretches of time spent on menus while trying to remember or remanage dozens of setups. The story meanders in many places. Tifa does not interject when Cloud is telling a clearly inconsistent version of the past she herself experienced in order to keep the twist hidden for later, and fans are left to headcanon with no further evidence why she wouldn't point that out in universe. The black materia is something that just exists, no further explanation given, and so are the Gi, a barely dealt footnote in the lore to justify a whole dungeon for Red 8's backstory. 2 members of your party are completely optional. One of them has a paper-thin personality that barely registers, and the other is only ever interesting when doing an optional side quest that reveals his past. Many of the desirable optional content is hiding behind incredibly obtuse requirements. I could go on, but my point is just that Final Fantasy VII is not perfect. Yet many believe it to be this immaculate work of genius. And of course they do. Like I said, Final Fantasy VII released just at the right time and did enough right to get itself into the cultural gaming zeitgeist. But because of that, it became this icon in people's heads, romanticized beyond the stretches of reasonability, an unreachable and immaculate masterpiece that means so much to those who played it back in the day as kids that any other attempt to use this IP for something is immediately met with unreasonable expectations and compared to an impossible standard that exists in different forms inside each person's mind. And at the same time, everyone also wants to relive that experience with a shiny new coat of paint. As much as many purists may say otherwise nowadays, it's no secret a Final Fantasy VII Remake has been exhaustively requested by fans as far back as the PS2 days. Everyone went crazy for that PS3 tech demo suggesting one was in the works. Paradoxically, while we all respect and consider Final Fantasy VII to be an idealized masterpiece, we also want to see it redone with new tech to, if only in presentation, surpass its original chibi low-poly aesthetics so that all of our impossible imagination as players can be willed into existence in all its glory. With that, of course, comes differing points of view on what the remake should even be at a fundamental level. There's those who want a perfectly one-to-one remake with an improved but still faithful art direction, using the recently released spin-off gacha game Ever Crisis as an example of what everyone always wanted. There's those who embrace the modern aesthetic set forth by Advent Children but want the game systems and story to be the exact same. Then those who would like an action battle system and to pick and choose which parts of the compilation could be integrated, or a blend of old art style with the new, and it just goes on and on and on. There would need to be at least 3 full different remakes in order to please everyone, and even then, it would still be compared to the original in the least charitable way possible. So, what do you do in this situation, where no matter what you do, it will be compared to an idealized piece of media that doesn't really exist in our mortal plane? When everyone wants you to recreate a particular and even personal moment in time through a game with wildly varying opinions on what that game even is. What do you do when this kind of responsibility falls onto your shoulders? Well, you talk about it. Arriving now at the real reason for this video, of course, the remakes. Announced originally at 2015 and finally coming out at 2020 as the first in a trilogy, Final Fantasy VII Remake went the, by now, very common rebuild route, as I like to call it. Much like the Evangelion rebuild movies, What it does is bait you into thinking you're getting an expanded but still faithful remake, only to introduce elements that not only eventually result in heavy changes in theories about it all actually being a sequel of sorts, but also introducing a meta-narrative that's in direct conversation with the original work, that entirely depends on subverting expectations in those already familiarized with it. While it was a novel idea by the time the rebuilds were taking place, it has become much more common as of late. I personally have come across this with Higurashi Go Sotsu and Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. I can't speak for other people, but I find this idea incredible and full of endless potential, even if between all those I've mentioned, the only one I think really pulled it off in a satisfying way was Scott Pilgrim. So, when Remake eventually revealed itself, I was very much interested, even if the execution did leave a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. You see, what Remake does is that in between the expected canonical events of the story, these weird Dementor-like ghosts called Whispers show up and prevent anything that would deviate too much from canon to happen. Like, Cloud gets extremely close to finding out the truth about his past way before scheduled.
My boy, you weren't a soldier.
What? What is this fascinating phenomenon? What's happening?
And Barrett fucking dies before being brought back to life. While I wasn't bored with that, it's the game's very final segments that had me kinda eye-rolling. You see, once they escape Midgar, they are caught into an interdimensional rift, which throws them into some very on-the-nose and barely explained in-universe meta area which apparently embodies the concept of fate, and they just roll with it, no questions asked, to fight a giant heartless ripped straight from Kingdom Hearts called the Arbiter of Fate. And once they defeat it, it is stated they are no longer bound to fate. While the way this is done is really out of left field and kinda hard to swallow, the implication is clear. As of this game, nothing is predetermined to play out like in the original. Things will change, as this is implied to be part of Sephiroth's plan since, well, according to fate, he's supposed to lose, and he doesn't want that. Furthermore, Zack is apparently alive, hurling an unconscious Cloud back to Midgar. It is then revealed the remake in the title was actually a cheeky pun that referred both to the fact of this product being a remake, but the in-universe explanation itself for Final Fantasy VII's destiny being remade. I was very much intrigued by that prospect and thought to myself, well, the next one is gonna be either incredible or it's gonna suck.
Whatever happens, I'm here for you.
No!
Well, I'm very happy to report Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, in my opinion, very much did not suck, and what it does with the lore and its increasingly scrutinized meta-narrative is amazing. The Final Fantasy VII Remake project was divided into a trilogy because, according to Square Enix, recreating the sense of scale of the original game with modern standards would be too complicated and expensive for just a single title. While I have my doubts regarding these statements, after Rebirth, I'm somewhat inclined to agree. This title goes through the middle section of the story all the way to Aerith's death, and it features huge open-world areas and expands considerably on the lore for all of them, most of the time for the absolute better. Barrett's backstory in Corel is told beautifully and much more in-depth than the original, and they actually take the time to plug in some plot holes. Remember the Black Materia and the Gi? Well, turns out the Gi were an extraterrestrial people that came to this planet after theirs was destroyed, but since they were aliens, they couldn't enter the life stream upon death, becoming tortured, undying souls that focused all of their hatred and bitterness into creating the Black Materia, so they could summon Meteor and destroy the entire planet alongside themselves. I don't know about you, but I think that's a very clever and lore-consistent answer to what was once essentially, these guys in this thing just happened to be around. Similarly, Tifa, Cloud's childhood friend who was present at Nibelheim's massacre and featured extensively in Cloud's misguided retelling of the events, is actually given a reason, which is developed throughout the whole game, to not interject. After Cloud tells the story, she actually confides to Aerith she has no recollection of Cloud ever being there during that time, and expresses worry over his state of mind. She's holding off telling him about it because she notices he's been having weird migraines whenever the subject is broached and fears for his well-being. This also has the added effect of building a relationship of friendship with Aerith that is wonderful to watch as it plays out throughout the game and you realize they have been sharing information off screen.
Zack? Sorry, no.
Well, that clears that up. He definitely doesn't know who Zack is.
It also further references and connects different aspects from the compilation that would make perfect sense to be here. Thankfully, this fucker is nowhere to be seen though, and wonderfully fleshes out the two originally optional characters of Yuffie and Vincent. Also, remember how I said the original was goofy as heck? Well, I'm very glad to inform you that Rebirth might be even wackier. None of that grim dark edge stuff, it's a relentless parade of tone whiplash with adorable and hilarious silliness that further fleshes out the whole cast of characters and works in favor of also showing Cloud's growth from a loner into a clearly softer goof who cares about the people he's traveling with and meeting. I will say the game structure as a series of open worlds with a bunch of side activities does lend itself to meandering, and the game has no business taking this long to finish even when you're not engaging with all of the content. They even greatly expanded the original's affection mechanic, which defines who you get to date on Gold Saucer. I obviously went with Tifa, by the way, as I've always done, because she just has the biggest smile. Anyway, it reboots the original aspects of the PS1 game wonderfully while expanding it, but also slowly adding to its meta-narrative, foreshadowing and layering the groundwork for something bigger, and it all culminates organically into the very end. Which makes sense, doesn't it? After all, if fate is no longer set in stone, will the singular most iconic moment of this game, perhaps this entire series, be changed as well? Will Aerith die? There's apparently some sort of multiverse thing going on. It becomes eventually clear that Zack is in some sort of separate timeline from the rest of the game, one where things went differently, and they can feel something is just not adding up, mainly the tear in the sky. Aerith's holy materia is actually hollow for some reason, implying she can't use it like in the original. After the section of the Temple of the Ancients, Sephiroth vaguely explains how there's multiple worlds within the livestream, and his new goal involves a new reunion, the reunion of all these worlds. The boundary between these worlds begins to blur, as Cloud is somehow teleported into one of these worlds in a dreamlike fugu state and is met by another Aerith who seems to know what's up. She has a nice date with him and keeps referencing to the looming threat on every old player's mind.
Whatever happens, don't blame yourself.
She gives Cloud what seems to be a working holy materia before being killed by Sephiroth. When Cloud finds himself back to his reality, they go to the place where Aerith is praying by herself. But now all those whispers are swirling around, implying things may change. You get to her, knowing what's about to happen. And then, the game actually lets you... No! But she's not out of the woods yet. Multiple possibilities are swirling in front of Cloud. Aerith is dead. Aerith is alive. Sephiroth landed his strike. His blade is clean of blood. All of the many players' wishes, yearnings, fears, and expectations conflating into one place. What will the developers land on? How much will be different? Who is going to get pandered to? The game boldly screams the answer to this last question. None of you. Meet Shinra Archaeology Department, a Twitter account dedicated to translating Final Fantasy VII related news and, more recently, chunks of the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Ultimania guide. For those of you who may not know, Ultimania is the brand name for the official guidebooks that release after every major title in the series, which usually contain walkthroughs, extra information about the scenario not found in the games proper, and developer interviews, though those are usually never released outside of Japan. In the case of 7 Rebirth, I think these are almost required reading given the as-of-yet vague nature of the in-universe lore explanation for the meta-narrative. Oh look, apparently the scenario writer was inspired by the collective unconsciousness. Here's my excuse to shill a previous video of mine about Persona. Very few people saw it, but I think it's pretty good. Check it out. As it probably has become abundantly clear, the story itself of these remakes is not only playing with the player's expectations, it's directly incorporating them into the narrative. Because the Final Fantasy VII in my head, or yours, simply does not exist. It has been romanticized by its fans due to how much of a landmark that game is, and to attempt to recreate it fully, one-to-one, is quite honestly a fool's errand. What this game means to so many people is essentially impossible to replicate. Maybe this game is imbued in meaning with you because it reminds you of simpler times when you weren't an adult with responsibilities. Maybe it represents a time of sheer excitement over the new possibilities brand new hardware could provide back when no game was in full 3D or features such detailed backgrounds yet. Maybe it was the first time you got exposed to anime or cyberpunk aesthetics, and even the first time you realized games could have long and epic, intricate stories. Final Fantasy VII's reputation has transcended itself to a place of idealism that goes beyond the original game's qualities and has become a cultural touchstone. There is simply no way to satisfy everyone, or even the majority of players who grew up playing this and at the same time clamoring for a remake. What you want is for a modern remake to somehow capture a moment in time, a specific moment of your life even. That's obviously impossible. What you can do, though, if you play your cards right, is to bring the player themselves into the conversation by attempting not only to subvert, but to blend and directly address all of those different ideas of the game into a single whole that is trying not to replicate, but to engage with and comment on the legacy of the idealization itself. This approach at least has a modicum of a chance of working out for the better. And apparently the developers think so too. According to a tweet from an interview with creative director Tetsuya Nomura for Rebirth Zootopmania, every player has a different personal Final Fantasy VII world, and the remake project was made to unite all of those countless versions together. And while a bit too obtuse for my personal liking, Rebirth's final section attempts to do just that. Cloud seems to be somehow experiencing multiple possibilities at the same time, and Sephiroth is counting on it to confuse him. Sephiroth explains part of his plan is to apparently harvest feelings of sorrow and loss in order to grow stronger and, supposedly, change the ending of the original. Your allies arrive, are horrified at Aerith's sight, and the iconic fight against another Genova organism begins as multiple worlds converge, but this time with the hype through the roof. Like in the original's final battle, your party splits into teams, each attacking one part of the increasingly bizarre Genova Lifeclinger while shouting revenge. All except Cloud, who seems oddly sure he will be able to save Aerith. Zack, who we now understand is from a different world where he didn't die, is somehow pulled into this convergence and fights Sephiroth alongside Cloud. It all eventually ends up in a final fight of Cloud versus Sephiroth, with the help
Let's end this. Together.
The battle ends with Sephiroth fleeing, his plan apparently foiled for now as the worlds begin to separate yet again. Cloud walks up to Aerith's body. Is she alive? Is she dead?
Aerith. Wake up.
Despite what you just saw, the rest of the party is not amused at all. They are crying in mourning as Cloud speaks to an Aerith only he can see. Somehow, he's got the black materia with him, is still oblivious to his true past, and is also the only one who can see a big tear in the sky. He bids Aerith farewell as he promises he'll defeat Sephiroth and leaves with the rest of the party. As you can probably surmise, everything as it stands is pretty confusing. We don't really know if Aerith is alive or dead, how exactly these multiple worlds work, and what is Sephiroth's full angle from now on. This is obviously a divisive ending for its second iteration, but it's still part of the ongoing meta-narrative between the developers and its fans, and it's precisely that meta-narrative that makes it all worthwhile. This conversation between the remakes and the legacy of the original is just fundamentally more interesting than any attempt to faithfully recreate the original, because the original only exists in our heads in different, parallel forms that relates to each of us games personally. To me specifically, Final Fantasy VII represents a part of my life when things were simpler, and I could kick back and enjoy a game that managed to ask for my full attention as it relayed its ambitions of telling an epic story of environmentalism, self-discovery, acceptance, and love through this new medium. And it probably means something else for you too. Trying to recapture a moment of someone's life through a new product is simply impossible, let alone thousands of potential customers' particular romanticizations of the original art. So even if the third installment's ultimate ending turns out to be disappointing, and that's definitely a possibility, this angle, this attempt in itself is just vastly more interesting and worthy of your time than just coating several new layers of paint over a 20-year-old game in hopes it lives up to insane expectations. If you want to play the original, play the original. It's widely available on all current platforms, and the PC version features a staggering amount of mods to tailor your experience in a myriad of ways. That's your best bet of reliving the experience you've had over 20 years ago. The remakes do not invalidate the original, and they don't want to. They want to use the original in order to offer you something new, something that acknowledges and celebrates the Final Fantasy VII in your memories. We don't really know what's going to happen next, and I don't really like to use this channel to theorize on unreleased stuff because it makes the video painfully dated, especially if I'm wrong, but the one thing I'm sure of is that it's going to be different, and given the quality we've got with Remake and Rebirth, this is just really exciting. But hey, no promises to keep, right?